Story 1. The Mile Marker That Counted Down. Marcus Chen had been driving long-haul routes for 12 years, and Interstate 80 through Nebraska was as familiar to him as his own driveway. On the night of October 14, 2019, he was hauling refrigerated produce from Sacramento to Chicago, running his usual schedule with the kind of autopilot confidence that comes from thousands of identical trips. The highway stretched before him in that endless prairie darkness, mile markers ticking past at regular intervals, their green signs catching his headlights every 60 seconds like clockwork. Around 2:30 a.m., somewhere past Kearney, Marcus noticed something odd about mile marker 237. The reflective numbers seemed brighter than usual, almost glowing with an intensity that made him blink. He thought nothing of it initially, probably just new paint or a replacement sign. But when he passed mile marker 236 a minute later, that same unusual brightness caught his attention again. And then 235. Each marker blazed with that peculiar luminescence, as if lit from within rather than merely reflecting his headlights. The Nebraska night pressed against his windows, an absolute darkness broken only by his truck's lights and those increasingly unsettling markers. His CB radio played quiet static, the occasional trucker conversation drifting in and out of range. Marcus adjusted his grip on the steering wheel and checked his mirrors. Empty highway behind him, empty highway ahead, just him, the darkness, and those markers counting down. Mile marker 234, then 233, then 282. Marcus had driven this route so many times, he could practically navigate it blind. He knew every exit, every rest stop, every peculiarity of the road, which is why what happened next made his stomach drop. After passing mile marker 232, he watched for 231. It appeared right on schedule, glowing with that eerie brightness. Then 230, then 229. Normal so far. But when the next marker came into view, Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. It read 231. He'd just passed one. Now here it was again. Marcus immediately checked his speedometer, 65 miles per hour, steady. His odometer was ticking forward normally. He looked in his mirrors again, thinking maybe he'd somehow gotten turned around. But no, his trailer was still behind him, the road still stretching back into darkness. Everything was exactly as it should be, except that mile marker. He convinced himself he'd misread it. Fatigue playing tricks. He'd been driving for 9 hours straight. But when the next marker appeared, glowing in that unsettling way, it read 230, then 229, then 228. His heart started beating faster. Okay, back on track. Just a mistake. But then came 227, 26, 25, and then 24, and then 225 again. The markers were counting down, but not consistently. Sometimes they'd progress normally for several miles, then suddenly jump backward. Sometimes they'd skip numbers entirely. He passed from 220 to 218, missing 219 completely. Then 217, 216, 215, and inexplicably back to 221. The pattern made no sense. Marcus grabbed his CB radio, keying the mic with a trembling hand. "This is westbound 80. Any drivers near Kearney? You seeing anything weird with the mile markers tonight?" Over. Static. He tried again. More static. Not even the distant chatter that usually occupied the channel. He switched frequencies. Nothing. He pulled out his phone. No signal, which wasn't entirely unusual in rural Nebraska. But the timing felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. The markers kept appearing, their glow intensifying. 214, 209, 218, 203. The numbers jumped around like a broken calculator, and Marcus realized with growing horror that he'd been driving for 20 minutes, but hadn't seen a single other vehicle. No cars, no trucks, no distant lights on the opposite side of the divided highway. Just him and these impossible markers in an endless tunnel of darkness. He tried to focus on landmarks, anything to orient himself, but the darkness seemed absolute beyond his headlight range. No farmhouse lights, no cell towers, no signs of civilization whatsoever. Just the road, the dashed white lines flowing past, and those markers appearing with mechanical regularity, each one contradicting the last. Marcus's hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. He was a rational man, not prone to panic, but this was wrong in a way that violated fundamental assumptions about reality. Roads didn't do this. Numbers followed sequences. Space was consistent. Yet here he was, apparently trapped in some kind of impossible loop, where distance had stopped meaning anything. He thought about stopping, but the idea terrified him more than continuing. What if he stopped and couldn't start again? What if the darkness beyond his lights contained something worse than confusion? So he kept driving, kept watching those markers appear and contradict themselves, kept hoping for some sign of normalcy. Then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The markers weren't just out of sequence, they were slowly trending downward. Despite the jumps and reversals, the overall pattern was descending. From the 230s down into the 210s, then the 200s, now into the 190s and 180s. He was counting down towards something, even as distance became meaningless. At marker 164, or maybe 171, he'd lost track of which number was real. Marcus saw the first exit sign. Exit 160, Lexington. His map showed that exit. It existed. It was real. But he'd already driven past Lexington hours ago, before any of this started. The exit ramp appeared in his headlights, but Marcus couldn't make himself take it. Something deep in his gut told him that leaving the highway would be worse than staying on it. He passed the exit. The markers continued their countdown. 159, 151, 167, 144. Each one glowing brighter now, almost painful to look at. The darkness seemed to press closer to his truck, as if his headlights were weakening, their range of illumination shrinking. He could barely see 30 feet ahead now, when they should have reached 300. Marcus noticed the odometer. In the last 40 minutes, it had advanced exactly 44 miles. The math was right. His speed multiplied by time. But how many mile markers had he passed? Dozens, hundreds. The physical distance he'd traveled didn't match the subjective experience of all those signs, appearing and disappearing into the darkness behind him. Then, at what the sign claimed was mile marker 97, everything changed. The glow from the marker was so intense it hurt to look at, almost blinding. And beyond it, Marcus saw the highway simply end. Not a construction barrier, not a closed road. The pavement just stopped, cutting off into absolute void, a darkness so complete it seemed to have texture, like a wall of black velvet hanging across the road. Marcus slammed on his brakes, his trailer fishtailing slightly as 65 miles per hour bled away into 50, 40, 30. His ABS engaged, chattering beneath him. He was going to run out of road. The void rushed toward him, or he rushed toward it, perspective becoming meaningless. 20 miles per hour, 10, 5. His front bumper touched the darkness, and the world lurched. Marcus found himself parked on the shoulder of Interstate 80, hazard lights flashing. The sun was rising. Early morning traffic was starting to build, cars and trucks passing him with normal frequency. His phone showed 6:47 a.m., October 15th. He'd lost 4 hours. His last clear memory was around 2:30 a.m. on the 14th. He climbed out of his cab on shaking legs and walked to the nearest mile marker. It read 237, that same marker where the wrongness had started. But it was just a normal green sign now, slightly faded paint, nothing unusual about it. The morning sun felt impossibly bright after that crushing darkness. Marcus completed his delivery to Chicago, but he filed his notice the same day. 12 years of clean driving, excellent safety record, but he was done. He now works in a warehouse, day shift only, and he takes surface streets for his commute. He hasn't been on an interstate highway since that morning. Sometimes, late at night when he can't sleep, Marcus pulls up mapping software on his computer and traces Interstate 80 through Nebraska. The mile markers are all there, properly numbered, ascending from west to east in perfect sequence. He zooms in on marker 237, studying the satellite image. It looks completely ordinary. But he knows what he saw. He knows those markers counted down toward something, toward some threshold where reality became negotiable. And he knows that somewhere on that highway, in the deepest hours of night, the markers still glow with that wrong light, still count down in their impossible sequence. The road is still there, overlapping the normal highway, like a transparency laid atop reality. Marcus just hopes no one else ever finds themselves on it, watching the numbers descend, wondering what waits at marker 0. Story 2. The Town That Swallowed Sounds. Jennifer Wolf's GPS died at the worst possible time. She was somewhere in rural Montana on Route 87, late afternoon on March 23, 2021, when the screen flickered and went black, despite showing a full charge minutes before. Her phone had no signal, not unusual in this part of the country. But she wasn't particularly worried. She'd seen a sign for a town called Ashford 15 miles back, and figured she'd reach it soon enough to ask for directions, or at least get her bearings with a physical map. The town appeared around a curve, just as the sun started sinking toward the horizon. Ashford looked like 1,000 other small Montana towns. Main Street lined with brick buildings from the early 1900s. A few side streets branching off into residential areas. Population sign reading 847. Jennifer felt relief wash over her. She'd fill up her Subaru's tank, maybe grab coffee, get pointed back toward the interstate. She pulled into a gas station on the edge of town, an old independent place with pumps that looked like they'd been installed in the 1980s. As she got out of her car, Jennifer noticed how quiet everything was. Not peaceful quiet, wrong quiet. She couldn't hear birds, couldn't hear wind, couldn't hear the distant hum of highway traffic that formed the background noise of every small town near a major route. The silence had texture, almost pressure, like the absence of sound was itself a presence. Jennifer stood by her car for a moment, listening to nothing. Even her own movements seemed muffled. When she closed her car door, it made a sound, but somehow dampened, as if she were hearing it through thick glass. The gas station appeared open, lights on inside, neon sign in the window advertising beer, but no one came out to greet her. Jennifer walked to the door, her footsteps making almost no sound on the concrete. She pulled the door open. The bell above it should have jingled, but didn't, or if it did, she couldn't hear it, and stepped inside. A man stood behind the counter, middle-aged, wearing a flannel shirt. He was looking down at something Jennifer couldn't see, maybe a magazine or phone. She walked up to the counter, the silence so complete it felt like physical weight on her shoulders. "Excuse me," Jennifer said, and her voice sounded wrong, flat, dead, like speaking into a pillow. "I need to pay for gas. Pump 3. The man didn't look up, didn't react at all. Jennifer felt the first prickle of real unease crawl up her spine. "Hello?" She spoke louder, or tried to. Her voice seemed to disappear into the silence, swallowed by it. She reached out and tapped the counter. The sound was barely audible, impossibly muted. The man still didn't respond. Jennifer looked around the store. It was fully stocked. Chips, candy, drinks in coolers along the back wall. Everything looked normal except for the suffocating silence and the man who wouldn't acknowledge her existence. She noticed security monitors behind the counter, showing various angles of the station. She could see herself on one screen, standing at the counter. But the image of her was frozen, not moving even as she shifted her weight and waved her hand. Her heart started pounding, but even that sound was muted, distant, as if her body were separating from her consciousness. Jennifer backed toward the door, and that's when she saw the calendar on the wall. It showed February 1998. She ran from the gas station, or tried to run. Her movements felt sluggish, the silence seeming to resist motion itself. She got back to her car and sat in the driver's seat, breathing hard. Through the windshield, she could see the main street of Ashford stretching before her. A few other vehicles were parked along it. No people, no movement. The street lights were starting to come on as dusk deepened, but they seemed to illuminate nothing, their light stopping just a few feet from the posts. Jennifer tried starting her car. The engine turned over, and she could feel the vibration through the seat, but couldn't hear it. Not a whisper of engine noise. Not the rattle of her old exhaust. Nothing. She put it in gear and drove slowly down the main street, watching for any sign of life. Stores lined both sides. A pharmacy, a diner, a hardware store, a bar. Through the windows, she could see lights on, even see people inside, frozen like mannequins. A woman in the diner held a coffee pot, paused mid-pour. A man in the hardware store reached for something on a shelf, his hand suspended in air. They weren't statues. Jennifer could see the slight texture of fabric, the reality of skin and hair, but they were absolutely still. She pressed the gas pedal, speeding up, desperate to reach the far side of town. But as she drove, the town seemed to extend. She'd passed what felt like a dozen blocks, far more than a population of 847 could support. And still the buildings continued. More stores, more frozen people, more oppressive, crushing silence. Jennifer's panic was escalating into something approaching terror. She floored the accelerator, the speedometer climbing to 60, then 70. The buildings blurred past, but somehow there were always more. The town was impossible. It stretched on, and the sun was setting behind her now, even though it had been in front of her when she entered town, and the shadows were growing in ways that didn't match the light source. Then she saw the figure in the road ahead, a child, maybe 10 years old, standing in the center of the street. Unlike everything else in Ashford, this child was moving. The child raised one hand, palm out, the universal gesture to stop. Jennifer hit the brakes, her car skidding. Without sound, the stop felt unreal, like a dream sequence. The child walked toward her car, and Jennifer saw that it was a girl in a dress from decades past, maybe the 1940s or 50s. The girl's mouth was moving, but no sound emerged. She was trying to say something urgently, her face showing distress. She pointed back the way Jennifer had come, then pointed at Jennifer, then made a turning motion with her hands. Turn around. Go back. Jennifer understood. She threw her car into reverse, craning her neck to see behind her. As she drove backward, the town finally began to shrink. Buildings passed in reverse, and she realized she could see the gas station again, getting closer. The girl in the road was running alongside her car now, still gesturing urgently, her mouth forming words Jennifer couldn't hear. When Jennifer's car reached the gas station, Reality lurched like a skip in a video. Suddenly sound crashed back into existence. The roar of her engine, the crunch of gravel, the wind, birds, the distant rumble of a truck on the highway. Jennifer gasped at the shock of it, her ears ringing with the sudden presence of normal noise. She was parked at the gas station again, but everything was different. The building was derelict, pumps removed, windows broken. The neon signs were long dead. Weeds grew through cracks in the pavement. It was abandoned, had been for years by the look of it. Jennifer got out of her car on trembling legs. She walked to the edge of the road and looked toward where the town should be. There was nothing, just empty prairie stretching to the horizon. No buildings, no streets, no Ashford. She found a historical marker about half a mile up the road. It read, "Site of Ashford, Montana, founded 1891. Abandoned 1957 after Route 87 was rerouted. Population at abandonment, 847. Jennifer drove away from that place as fast as her car would go, and she didn't stop until she reached Great Falls 2 hours later. She checked into a motel and spent the night with every light on, listening to the television just to hear sound, to confirm that noise still existed in the world. She later researched Ashford. The town had been bypassed when the highway was rerouted, and the population had gradually left. By 1957, it was completely empty. The buildings had been demolished in the early 1960s. Nothing remained except foundations and the historical marker. But Jennifer found one other thing in her research, a 1998 newspaper article about a woman named Patricia Keene who'd disappeared while driving through Montana. Her car was found abandoned near the site of Old Ashford. Patricia was never seen again. The article included a photo. Jennifer stared at it for a long time, her hands shaking. The woman in the photo was the frozen figure she'd seen in the diner, holding the coffee pot. Jennifer sold her car the next week and now lives in Chicago, where she takes public transportation everywhere. She's never driven through rural Montana again, and she never will, because she knows that somewhere off Route 87, there's a gap in reality where a ghost town still exists, trapped in silence, collecting the lost. And somewhere in that impossible place, Jennifer suspects she saw herself on those security monitors, a frozen figure at the gas station counter, trapped in a moment from March 23rd, 2021. She got away, but part of her is still there, suspended in that terrible silence, waiting for someone else to find it. The thought keeps her awake at night, listening to the sounds of the city, grateful for every car horn and siren and human voice, because she knows now that silence can be hungry, and some towns never really die. They just wait in the spaces between then and now, swallowing sounds and the people who hear them disappear. Story 3. The Headlights That Followed Wrong. Daniel Reeves drove a UPS route through rural Kentucky, covering a circuit of small towns and isolated houses that took him from dawn to dusk, 5 days a week. On the evening of November 9th, 2020, he was running late on the last leg of his route, a narrow state highway that wound through heavily forested hills. The sun had set an hour earlier, and his truck's headlights cut through the darkness as he navigated the familiar curves. Around 7:30 p.m., Daniel noticed headlights in his mirrors. Not unusual. This was a public road, after all. But something about these headlights immediately struck him as odd. They were too bright, almost bluish-white, the kind of intensity you'd expect from aftermarket HID lights, but with a quality that made them seem to produce light that didn't behave quite right. The beams seemed sharper than normal headlights, more focused, like lasers cutting through the darkness. Daniel continued driving, watching the headlights maintain a steady distance behind him, maybe 200 feet back. He came to a fork in the road and took the left branch toward the depot. The headlights followed. Okay, maybe they were heading the same direction. Except this branch of the road led only to the UPS depot and a dead-end gravel road beyond it. No residential areas, no businesses. There was no reason for another vehicle to be going this way at this hour. Daniel's unease grew. He slowed down to 40 miles per hour. The headlights slowed too, maintaining that exact distance. He sped up to 60. The headlights accelerated to match. The precision of it felt wrong. No human driver maintained such perfect distance, never varying by even a few feet. Then Daniel noticed something that made his mouth go dry. He was going around a sharp curve, the road bending hard to the right. His headlights swept across the curve, illuminating trees and guardrails. But the headlights behind him didn't follow the curve. They cut straight through it, passing through the forest where no road existed, then reappearing on the road behind him when the curve straightened out. That wasn't possible. Vehicles couldn't drive through solid forest. Yet that's exactly what these headlights had done. Daniel stared at his mirrors, his heart hammering. The lights were still there, still maintaining that perfect distance, still burning with that wrong intensity. Another curve approached, this one bending left. Daniel watched, unable to look away from his mirrors. The headlights again cut straight through the curve, passing through trees and rocks and terrain, treating solid matter as if it didn't exist. They reappeared on the road behind him, exactly 200 feet back, as if nothing had happened. Daniel grabbed his phone, thinking he'd call someone, though he wasn't sure who or what he'd even say. No signal. He was in a dead zone, would be until he got closer to the depot. He was alone with this impossible thing following him. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe reflections. Some optical illusion created by his mirrors and the angle of lights from a different road. But there was no other road. And the lights moved too intelligently, too purposefully. They weren't random. They were following him specifically. Daniel came to a straight stretch of highway, about a mile long. He floored the accelerator, his UPS truck straining to reach 75 miles per hour. The headlights fell back briefly, then accelerated with impossible speed, closing the distance in seconds and resuming that exact 200-foot following distance. Whatever was producing those lights had no difficulty matching his speed or exceeding it. The depot was still 15 miles away. Daniel considered his options. He could stop, try to confront whatever this was, but the thought terrified him. What if those lights came right through his truck, the way they passed through the forest? What if stopping was exactly what they wanted? So he kept driving, kept watching those lights in his mirrors, kept hoping for some rational explanation that never came. As he drove, Daniel started noticing other wrongness about the pursuing headlights. They didn't bounce or sway the way normal headlights would on this uneven road. They remained perfectly steady, as if mounted on a vehicle with no suspension, or on something that wasn't a vehicle at all. And when he passed through patches of ground fog that lay across the road, his headlights reflected off the moisture, creating visible beams. The lights behind him didn't. They produced illumination without visible beams, as if the light simply appeared at its destination without traveling through the space between. Daniel's hands were cramping from gripping the steering wheel. He came to a section of road he knew well, a place where a small bridge crossed a creek with steep embankments on both sides. The road dipped down, crossed the bridge, then climbed back up. It was impossible to see the bridge until you were almost on it. An idea formed in Daniel's mind, probably stupid, probably dangerous, but he was beyond rational decision-making. He accelerated as he approached the dip, then at the last second, cut his headlights completely and slammed on his brakes. His truck decelerated violently, the seatbelt cutting into his chest. He brought the vehicle to a complete stop right in the middle of the bridge, sitting in absolute darkness. The pursuing headlights came over the rise behind him. For a moment, they continued at their previous speed, closing the distance. Daniel held his breath, waiting for impact. But instead of crashing into him, the lights simply stopped. They hovered in the air above the road, about 30 feet behind his truck, burning with that cold, intense glow. Daniel stared at them in his mirrors. They weren't attached to anything. No vehicle, no structure. Just two sources of impossible light hanging in the darkness above the bridge, as if considering their next move. Then they began to change. The lights separated, moving apart from each other, widening the gap between them from about 6 feet to 10, then 15. They rose higher, climbing to perhaps 12 feet above the road surface. And they began to grow brighter, the intensity increasing until Daniel had to look away from his mirrors, the glare painful even as a reflection. Daniel fumbled for his headlight switch and flipped it back on, simultaneously hitting the gas. His truck lurched forward, tires squealing. In his mirrors, he saw the lights drop back down to road level and resume their pursuit, once again maintaining that perfect distance. But something had changed. The lights were closer now, not 200 feet back, but maybe 100. And every mile Daniel drove, they crept closer. 100 feet became 90. 90 became 80. The distance was shrinking, and Daniel understood with cold certainty that they would eventually reach him. He pushed his truck as hard as it would go, the engine screaming in protest. The depot was 5 miles ahead, 4 miles, 3. The lights were 70 feet back now, 2 miles to the depot. The lights were 50 feet back, 1 mile, 40 feet. Daniel saw the lights of the depot ahead, blazing like a beacon. He'd never been so grateful to see that facility. He roared into the parking lot and pulled up right in front of the main building, where 2 other drivers were loading their trucks for overnight routes. Daniel jumped out of his cab, his legs nearly buckling. He spun around to look at the highway. The mysterious headlights were gone. The road was dark and empty. "You okay, man?" one of the other drivers called out. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Daniel couldn't speak for a moment. He just stood there, staring at the empty highway, his whole body shaking. He eventually muttered something about rough roads and went inside to file his paperwork. But he couldn't shake the feeling that those lights were still out there, waiting. Over the next few weeks, Daniel did research. He contacted old-timers in the area, asked about local legends or strange occurrences on that stretch of highway. One elderly man at a gas station told him a story. Back in 1967, a state trooper named Officer James Callahan had pursued a speeding vehicle along that exact road. The chase had ended when the speeding vehicle somehow lost control and crashed through a guardrail, plunging into a ravine. No body was ever recovered from the wreckage. Officer Callahan's report had been strange. He'd claimed the vehicle didn't drive like a normal car, that it seemed to float over rough patches of road and take curves at impossible speeds. 2 weeks after filing that report, Officer Callahan disappeared. His patrol car was found abandoned on the same highway, engine running, headlights on, doors locked from the inside. Callahan was never seen again. Daniel requested a route change, and the company approved it. He now drives in broad daylight through suburban areas, never on rural highways, never after dark. He sold the pickup truck he used for personal use and bought a sedan with weak, yellowed headlights. He doesn't want bright lights anymore, doesn't want to attract attention from things that notice such things. Sometimes, when he's lying in bed at night, Daniel closes his eyes and sees those headlights in his memory, burning with that cold, wrong light. He remembers the way they cut through the forest, as if solid matter were just a suggestion. He remembers how they hung in the air above the bridge, considering him. And he knows, with absolute certainty, that if he ever drives that road again at night, the lights will be waiting. They'll resume their pursuit, picking up exactly where they left off, closing that final 40 feet of distance. Whatever they are, they're patient. They have all the time in the world. And someday, Daniel fears, he'll forget to be careful, forget to stay afraid, and he'll find himself on a dark, rural highway with his mirrors full of impossible light. He hopes that day never comes, but late at night, when sleep won't come and his mind drifts, he wonders if the day matters at all, if those lights might simply appear behind him anywhere, anytime, resuming their patient, inevitable pursuit. Story 4. The Rest. Stop at the end of everything. Patricia Mendez had driven from Phoenix to Albuquerque more times than she could count, hauling freight for a regional company that specialized in overnight deliveries. Interstate 40 through Arizona and New Mexico was her primary route, a stretch of highway she knew intimately, every exit, every truck stop, every landmark. So when she saw the rest area on the night of January 7th, 2022, she immediately knew something was wrong. It was 3:45 a.m., and Patricia was fighting fatigue. She'd been driving for 7 hours and needed coffee, needed to stretch her legs, needed a break from the hypnotic white lines flowing past her headlights. A rest area appeared ahead, its sign illuminated. Rest area 1 mile. Patricia didn't remember a rest area in this location. Between Holbrook and Chambers, this stretch of I-40 was notoriously devoid of services. But exhaustion was catching up to her, and she gratefully took the exit. The ramp curved away from the highway, descending into a small valley that Patricia didn't remember existing. Desert landscape surrounded her, visible in her headlights as scrub brush and red rock formations. The rest area came into view. A single-story building with restrooms, a few vending machines visible through windows, and a parking lot that could accommodate maybe 20 vehicles. Only one other vehicle was there, a sedan parked at the far end of the lot, away from the lights. Patricia pulled her truck into a spot near the building and climbed out, her joints creaking from too long in the driver's seat. The night was cold, her breath visible in the air. Stars blazed overhead with that intensity only possible far from city lights. As Patricia walked toward the building, she noticed the silence. No highway noise. The interstate was less than half a mile away. She should have been able to hear the occasional truck or car passing. But there was nothing. Just wind and the crunch of her boots on pavement. The rest area building was open, lights on inside. Patricia pushed through the door and stopped. The interior looked normal enough. Tile floors, cinder block walls, signs pointing to restrooms. But the style was wrong. Everything looked dated, like a rest stop from the 1970s or 80s. The vending machines were old models with manual coin mechanisms. The water fountain was the kind with a button instead of a sensor. Even the lighting fixtures were decades out of date. Patricia walked to the vending machines and examined them. The products inside looked wrong too. Soft drink brands she didn't recognize. candy bars with packaging designs from before she was born. Prices listed at 25 cents, 50 cents, 75 cents. She reached out and touched the glass. It felt real, cold under her fingers. "Machines don't work," a voice said behind her. Patricia spun around. A man stood there, maybe 40 years old, wearing clothes that looked simultaneously dated and new. Jeans and a button-down shirt, styles that could have been from the 1980s. His face was pale, drawn, and his eyes held a haunted quality that made Patricia immediately uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," she managed. "The vending machines," the man said. "They don't work. Nothing here works the way you'd expect." "When did you arrive?" "Just now, a minute ago. I drove in from the highway." The man's expression shifted to something that might have been pity or horror. Patricia couldn't tell which. "What year do you think it is?" The question was so bizarre that Patricia laughed nervously. "It's 2022, January 7th, 2022. Are you okay?" 2022, the man repeated softly. "It's gotten farther. When I arrived, it was 1987. August 14th, 1987. I was driving to Flagstaff and stopped here for coffee. That was..." He paused, his eyes distant. "That was 3 days ago. For me, anyway." Patricia's unease crystallized into fear. The man was clearly disturbed, possibly dangerous. She backed toward the door, keeping him in sight. "Look, I'm just going to head back to my truck." "You can't leave," the man said. "I mean, you can walk to your truck, you can sit in it, you can start the engine. But you can't leave. The exit ramp only goes one direction. There's no way back to the highway." "That's insane." "Yes," the man agreed. "It is, but you'll see. When you get back in your truck and try to find the exit, you'll see. The ramp doesn't go back up to the interstate. It just circles back here. Always back here." Patricia turned and ran from the building, her heart pounding. She climbed into her truck and started the engine, the familiar rumble comforting. She threw it into gear and drove toward the exit, the ramp that had brought her here. It was right there, clearly visible, heading back up toward... The ramp curved. Patricia followed it, expecting it to rise back to highway level, expecting to see the interstate ahead. Instead, the ramp curved in a long, gradual arc, and after 2 minutes of driving, Patricia found herself entering the rest area parking lot again, approaching from the opposite direction. She stopped the truck, staring at the building in disbelief. That wasn't possible. The ramp couldn't loop back on itself. It defied basic geometry. Patricia shifted into reverse and backed up, intending to retrace her path. But the ramp behind her also curved wrong, and after a minute of backward driving, she entered the parking lot again, from yet another direction. Patricia tried 4 more times, approaching the exit from different angles, driving faster, driving slower, keeping the truck in the lowest gear. Every attempt ended the same way, back in the rest area parking lot, with that dated building and those vintage vending machines waiting under the orange sodium lights. She finally parked again, her hands trembling. The man from the building was standing outside now, watching her. Patricia got out of her truck, and the man nodded as if her return was expected. "How long have you been here?" Patricia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 days, like I said. For me. But I've seen others come and go, or try to go. They can't either. Some of them have been here longer. There's a woman who says she arrived in 1993. A trucker who claims it was 1979. They're inside, in the back areas. They've mostly stopped coming out. That's not possible. People would have noticed. The highway patrol, the company that manages rest areas. "This rest area doesn't appear on any maps," the man said. I've asked everyone who arrives. Some have GPS units, phones with mapping software. This place doesn't show up. It exists somewhere adjacent to the highway, pulling people in, but it's not officially here. Patricia pulled out her phone. No signal, as expected, but she opened her downloaded maps. She zoomed in on this stretch of I-40. No rest area was marked, just empty desert between Holbrook and Chambers. The sun will rise in a few hours, the man said. That's when it gets worse. Worse how? You'll see. The man walked back into the building, leaving Patricia alone in the parking lot. She considered her options. She could wait for morning, see if daylight changed anything. She could explore, try to find some alternative route out of this valley. She could try contacting the other people the man had mentioned, though that prospect terrified her. Or she could keep trying to drive out, testing every possible angle and approach. Patricia chose to wait. She locked herself in her truck, using the sleeper berth, and tried to rest. Sleep wouldn't come. She watched the stars wheel slowly overhead, their positions subtly wrong, constellations that seemed familiar, but somehow rearranged. Dawn came eventually, light spreading across the desert. Patricia sat up and looked out her window. Then she understood what the man had meant. The landscape beyond the rest area was dissolving. As sunlight touched the desert, the rocks and brush and sand began to lose cohesion, colors bleeding together, forms becoming indistinct. It was like watching a watercolor painting left in the rain, everything running and blurring and losing definition. Within 20 minutes of full sunrise, there was nothing beyond the parking lot except formless gray void, an absence of reality that hurt to look at directly. The rest area itself remained solid and real, a small island of defined space surrounded by nothing. Patricia ran back into the building, panic overwhelming her. Inside, she found 5 other people. The man from last night, an elderly woman who introduced herself as Margaret and said she'd been here since 1993, a trucker named Earl from 1979, a young couple, David and Lisa, who'd arrived in 2015. They all had the same haunted look, the same exhausted acceptance. The void comes every dawn, Margaret explained, and it lasts until sunset. We can't go out in it. We tried at first. Earl walked 20 feet into it and came back saying it goes on forever, that there's no ground, no air, just nothing that your mind can't process. He was different after that. Part of him got left out there. Patricia looked at Earl. The trucker's eyes were vacant, his expression slack. He looked at Patricia, but didn't seem to see her. At night, the desert comes back, David added, and we can try the exit ramps again, but it never works. Always loops back here. We've been mapping it, trying to understand the geometry, but it doesn't follow rules. Space is broken in this place. Patricia spent that first day in shock, trying to process her situation. The other trapped travelers shared their supplies. Vending machine food from before the machines stopped working. Bottled water that refilled itself in the bathrooms overnight. The place sustained them at a subsistence level, keeping them alive, but never quite satisfied. At sunset, the desert resolved back into existence, and Patricia tried again to find a way out. She drove for 2 hours, following the ramps, trying to map their impossible curves, but always returning to the rest area. The geometry was fluid, changing, defying comprehension. Days blended together. Patricia lost track of time. The other travelers told her it would happen, that the unusual day-night cycle here, slightly wrong, slightly too fast, would erode her sense of chronology. She stopped counting sunrises after 12. Then, one night, a new vehicle arrived. A pickup truck, recent model, driven by a young man who looked terrified even before he parked. Patricia and the others went out to greet him, to explain his situation, to welcome him to their permanent limbo. But as the young man got out of his truck, the rest area flickered. Like a light bulb about to burn out, everything wavered for just an instant. The parking lot, the building, the vehicles, all of it became translucent. And through the transparency, Patricia saw the real desert, the real interstate, the real world continuing without them. Then it solidified again, and the moment passed. "Did you see that?" David whispered. They all had, and they understood what it meant. This place wasn't permanent. It was maintained somehow, held together by something, and that something was weakening. Over the next subjective weeks, the flickers became more frequent. The rest area would destabilize, offering glimpses of reality beyond it. During these moments, the exit ramps seemed more real, more connected to actual space. Patricia timed them, waiting for the right moment. When the next flicker came, she was in her truck, engine running, positioned at the exit ramp. As the rest area became translucent, she floored the accelerator. The truck shot forward, tires squealing. The ramp ahead looked different during the flicker, properly connected to something beyond, a genuine path rather than an impossible loop. Patricia drove faster than was safe, the ramp rising, curving, and then sunlight. Real sunlight. Interstate 40 ahead of her. Other vehicles. The return to normal reality was so sudden and complete that Patricia almost crashed, swerving to avoid a semi-truck she hadn't seen coming. She pulled onto the shoulder, her whole body shaking. Behind her, there was no exit ramp, just empty desert stretching to the horizon. The rest area was gone. Patricia's trip logs showed she'd been missing for 17 days. Her company had reported her missing. Her truck had simply vanished between Holbrook and Chambers. Search teams had found nothing. She tried to explain, but who could believe it? She was evaluated by doctors, psychologists, investigators. Eventually, the explanation settled on some kind of fugue state, though no one could explain where she'd been or how she'd survived. Patricia quit trucking. She now works from home, never traveling more than a few miles from her apartment. She's in therapy, trying to process what she experienced. Sometimes she wonders about the others, Margaret, Earl, David, Lisa, and that unnamed man from 1987. Did they escape during a flicker, or are they still there, trapped in that pocket of broken space? She hopes they found their way out. But late at night, when she can't sleep, Patricia pulls up satellite images of that stretch of I-40. She zooms in, scanning the desert for any sign of the rest area. And sometimes, just for a fraction of a second, before the image loads fully, she thinks she sees it. A small building with a parking lot, existing in the gap between satellite passes, flickering in and out of reality. She never looks for long, because she's terrified that if she sees it clearly, if she confirms it's still there, it might remember her. And one night, she might find herself driving on an empty highway, exhausted and looking for a place to rest, and a sign will appear ahead. Rest Area 1 mile. And this time, she knows, the flickers won't come. This time, she'll be there forever, watching new arrivals, watching the void come with each dawn, watching space loop back on itself endlessly. So Patricia doesn't look too closely at those satellite images. She doesn't drive at night. And she tells herself that the rest area at the end of everything was just a hallucination, just stress and exhaustion and nothing more. But she doesn't believe it. She knows what she saw. She knows what she escaped. And she knows it's still out there, waiting for the next exhausted traveler who needs a break, who needs coffee, who needs just a few minutes of rest before continuing their journey. Some rest areas offer refreshment. That one offers eternity. Story 5. The radio broadcast from nowhere. Thomas Hartley drove a converted school bus that he'd turned into a mobile home, traveling across America doing freelance web design and living on the road. In December 2018, he was crossing Texas on Highway 285, heading south through the vast emptiness between Carlsbad and Fort Stockton. The area was remote, desert stretching to the horizon in all directions, with hours between towns and virtually no radio signals. Around 11 p.m., Thomas was scanning through radio frequencies out of boredom, listening to static and the occasional fragment of distant stations fading in and out. Then, at 87.9 FM, a frequency that shouldn't have had anything in this part of Texas, he found a station broadcasting clearly. A voice was speaking, male, with a calm, professional tone that reminded Thomas of old news broadcasts from the 1950s. The audio quality was strange, too clean, with no background noise or interference despite the remote location. Thomas turned up the volume and listened. And the westbound lanes remain closed at mile marker 43. State authorities are still searching for the vehicle reported missing earlier this evening. If you have information about the 2018 gray Dodge school bus conversion, license plate Arizona ABX 4729, please contact. Thomas's hands clenched on the steering wheel. That was his license plate, his vehicle. The broadcaster was talking about him. Last seen traveling south on Highway 285 at approximately 8:30 p.m. The driver, Thomas Hartley, age 34, is described as Caucasian, 6 feet tall, brown hair. Hartley was reportedly driving erratically before his vehicle disappeared from view. Search and rescue teams are concentrating efforts around mile marker 43, where witnesses reported seeing unusual lights. This wasn't possible. Thomas was right here, driving, not missing. He grabbed his phone. No signal. Hadn't had one for the last hour. His GPS showed him at mile marker 38, 5 miles south of the location the broadcast mentioned. Everything was normal. He was fine. The broadcast continued. Investigators are treating this as a potential abduction or voluntary disappearance. Hartley's family has been notified. His sister, Karen Hartley Webb, issued a statement asking for anyone with information to come forward. The family is offering a $10,000 reward. Thomas had a sister named Karen Hartley Webb. This was information not publicly available, details that no random broadcast should know. His panic was escalating. He looked at his dashboard clock. 11:17 p.m., December 19th, 2018. The date seemed important suddenly, like something he needed to anchor himself to. The radio broadcast shifted. A new voice, female, also with that odd too clean audio quality. We're receiving reports of another sighting, mile marker 41. Witnesses describe lights in the desert, approximately 2 miles east of the highway. Law enforcement is responding. We'll update as more information becomes available. Mile marker 41 was a mile ahead of Thomas's current position. He was traveling toward whatever the broadcast was describing. His instinct screamed at him to turn around, but there was nowhere to turn on this straight, empty highway. And part of him needed to see, needed to understand what was happening. He passed mile marker 39, then 40. The broadcast continued with weather updates, traffic reports from towns hundreds of miles away, advertisements for businesses that didn't exist. Then, breaking news. Search teams have found evidence at mile marker 43. Details are limited, but sources close to the investigation report finding Hartley's vehicle abandoned with the engine running and driver's door open. No sign of Hartley himself. The scene is being treated as suspicious. Thomas looked in his rearview mirror. His bus was solid, real, definitely not abandoned at mile marker 43, 5 miles behind him. Yet the radio insisted otherwise. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Mile marker 41 appeared ahead. Thomas slowed down, scanning the desert to his east. He saw nothing, just darkness and the faint suggestion of landscape under starlight. No lights, no activity, no search teams. The highway was completely empty in both directions. Then the radio signal changed. The broadcast cut off mid-sentence, replaced by a sound that made Thomas's skin crawl. A tone, high-pitched and wavering, that seemed to resonate in his skull rather than his ears. The tone modulated, creating patterns that felt meaningful without being language, like his brain was trying to decode a signal it wasn't designed to receive. Thomas's vision blurred. The highway ahead seemed to stretch and distort, distance becoming uncertain. He blinked hard, trying to clear his eyes, and that's when he saw them. Lights in his rearview mirror. Not headlights from another vehicle. These lights were in the desert, east of the highway, exactly where the broadcast had described. Multiple lights, maybe a dozen, moving in coordinated patterns. They were too bright, too colorful. Blues and greens and colors Thomas didn't have names for. Colors that seemed to occupy spaces between normal wavelengths. The tone on the radio intensified, and Thomas felt pressure building in his head. His nose started to bleed, warm blood running down his upper lip. He wiped it away with a shaking hand and saw red on his fingers. But in the dashboard lights, the blood looked wrong. Too dark, almost purple. The lights in the desert were getting closer, moving toward the highway at impossible speed. Thomas floored the accelerator, his bus engine straining. The speedometer climbed to 70, then 80. He'd never pushed the vehicle this hard, but terror overrode caution. Mile marker 42, then 43. Thomas saw something on the side of the road ahead. A vehicle pulled over, flashes on. As he got closer, his blood turned to ice. It was a school bus, gray, converted for living, exactly like his. The driver's door was open. The engine appeared to be running, exhaust visible in the cold air. His bus. He was looking at his own vehicle, abandoned and empty. Thomas's bus passed the abandoned one at 80 miles per hour. He craned his neck to look back and saw it clearly in his mirrors, his Arizona license plate, his custom paint job on the rear bumper, his roof racks with his solar panels. It was identical because it was his bus, somehow existing in two places simultaneously. The radio tone reached a crescendo, and Thomas's vision went white. When it cleared, he was still driving, but everything felt different. The highway looked the same, but subtly wrong. The painted lines were a slightly different shade of yellow. The mile markers were a different design. He passed mile marker 43 again, but this marker was newer. The sign style more modern. Thomas looked at his dashboard clock. It read 11:17 p.m., December 19th, 2018. The same time it had shown minutes ago. Time had looped, or he'd jumped, or reality had split. He didn't know what was happening, couldn't process it. The radio broadcast returned, clear as before. The male voice. Update on the missing person case. Thomas Hartley's vehicle has been found at mile marker 43 on Highway 285. Hartley is still missing. Search efforts continue through the night. Law enforcement asks that motorists in the area report any suspicious activity. Thomas started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound even to his own ears. He was the suspicious activity. He was the ghost on the highway, the missing person, the mystery that would never be solved, because he was living it from the inside. He kept driving south, afraid to stop, afraid to turn around, afraid that stopping might solidify whatever impossible state he'd entered. The radio continued its broadcast, updating the search, interviewing his family members, speculating about his disappearance. He listened to his own memorial service, heard his mother crying, heard friends share memories of him in past tense. At dawn, Thomas reached Fort Stockton. The radio signal faded as he approached the town, cutting off in mid-sentence. He pulled into a truck stop, climbed out of his bus on trembling legs, and stood in the parking lot, breathing hard. The morning sun felt real. The concrete under his feet felt solid. Other people moved around him, normal travelers doing normal things. Thomas went inside and bought coffee, interacted with the cashier, confirmed that he was visible and solid and present. The cashier didn't react to him as if he were a ghost. Everything seemed normal. He pulled out his phone. He had signal now. He checked the date. December 20th, 2018, 7:42 a.m. He'd lost 8 hours somewhere. He called his sister Karen. She answered, concerned but not panicked, asking why he was calling so early. She hadn't been notified that he was missing. There'd been no search, no reward. Thomas asked if she'd spoken to any reporters or police. She said no, confused by the question. Thomas didn't tell her what had happened. What could he say? He thanked her for answering, made an excuse about wanting to hear a familiar voice, and hung up. He researched the location later. Mile marker 43 on Highway 285 in Texas. Online forums mentioned strange lights in that area. A few stories about missing time, vehicles found abandoned. Nothing concrete, nothing official, just whispers and anecdotes that might have been fabrication or exaggeration. But Thomas found one thing that chilled him. In 1973, a truck driver named Raymond Foster disappeared on Highway 285 near mile marker 43. His truck was found empty, engine running, door open. Foster was never seen again. The case remained unsolved. The details matched exactly, same location, same circumstances, separated by 45 years. Thomas sold his bus a month later and moved into an apartment in Austin. He works remotely still, but he doesn't travel. He avoids long-distance driving, especially at night, especially in remote areas. He wonders sometimes what would have happened if he'd stopped at that mile marker, if he'd approached the abandoned version of his bus. Would he have found himself inside it, creating some kind of temporal paradox? Or would he have simply disappeared, becoming another unexplained missing person case? He still has nightmares about that radio broadcast, his own missing person case reported while he was listening, his memorial service broadcast to an audience of one. In the dreams, he's driving endlessly through a night that never ends, past mile marker 43 over and over, seeing his bus abandoned on the shoulder, seeing lights in the desert that shouldn't exist. Sometimes Thomas wakes up and immediately checks the date, checks the news, confirms that he's still present in the normal flow of time. He's terrified that one day he'll wake up and find that he disappeared weeks ago, that he's been missing all along, that he's been driving through some shadow version of reality, while the real world moved on without him. The rational part of his mind knows this is paranoia, but the rational part of his mind also can't explain what happened on Highway 285. Can't explain the radio broadcast that knew too much. Can't explain the abandoned bus that was his bus. Can't explain the 8 hours that vanished. Thomas avoids Highway 285 now. He avoids long empty stretches of road. And he never ever scans radio frequencies while driving at night, because he's afraid that one night he'll find that signal again, that voice calmly reporting his disappearance, while he's still there to hear it, still present, still driving toward mile marker 43, where something waits to erase him from the world. Some broadcasts come from radio stations. Others come from places where reality breaks down, transmitting from alternate timelines or parallel moments, reporting events that haven't happened yet, or are happening simultaneously in different versions of the same space. Thomas heard one of those broadcasts, and he knows that somewhere, in some version of events, he didn't make it to Fort Stockton. Somewhere, his bus was found abandoned at mile marker 43, and Thomas Hartley simply ceased to exist. He's grateful he's in the timeline where he survived, but he can't shake the feeling that the other timeline is still there, still playing out, still waiting for him to make a wrong turn and slip back into it. So he stays in Austin. He stays put. And he never listens to the radio late at night, because he's afraid of what frequency he might find, and what news it might broadcast about a man who should be there to hear it but isn't, because he disappeared on Highway 285, near mile marker 43, where lights in the desert pull travelers out of reality and leave nothing behind but mysteries that will never be solved. Story 6. The Car That Drove Beside Me. Aisha Rahman was returning home to Little Rock from a business meeting in Memphis, taking Interstate 40 west through Arkansas on February 11th, 2021. It was just past midnight, the highway mostly empty, a few scattered trucks and late-night travelers making their way through the darkness. Aisha had made this drive dozens of times, was comfortable with night driving, and wasn't concerned about the journey. She was in the middle lane, cruise control set at 70, when she noticed a car in the left lane pacing her. It was an older model sedan, maybe 1990s vintage, light blue or gray, hard to tell in the sodium lights and darkness. The car maintained exact speed with Aisha, neither pulling ahead nor falling back, staying perfectly aligned with her vehicle. Aisha found it mildly annoying. She sped up to 75 to pass. The other car matched her speed instantly, staying aligned. She slowed to 65. The car slowed too, maintaining that perfect parallel position. Aisha glanced over, trying to see the driver, but the windows were dark, tinted or simply shadowed, revealing nothing. This continued for several miles. The car wouldn't pass, wouldn't fall back, just stayed there in Aisha's peripheral vision like a reflection. She tried changing lanes, moving to the right lane. The other car changed lanes too, moving to the middle lane, maintaining that exact parallel position. Aisha's annoyance shifted to unease. This wasn't normal driving behavior. She took the next exit, a random off-ramp leading to a small town she didn't know. As she left the highway, she watched her mirrors. The other car also took the exit, following her down the ramp. The small town was mostly dark, a few streetlights illuminating empty intersections. Aisha drove through it, her heart rate climbing. The other car stayed with her, always beside her, matching every turn, every speed change. She took random turns, left, then right, then left again, trying to lose the vehicle. It was impossible. No matter what she did, the car remained perfectly parallel. She tried to think rationally. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe the driver was lost and following her. But that didn't explain the precision, the way the car matched her movements with mechanical exactness, like it was locked to her position. Aisha headed back toward the interstate, thinking she'd feel safer on the highway, with other vehicles around. As she merged back onto I-40, accelerating up the ramp, the other car stayed with her. When she reached highway speed and merged into traffic, she looked over at it again. That's when she noticed the passengers. The back seat of the other car was full. Aisha couldn't see details through the dark windows, but she could see forms. 3, maybe 4 people sitting in the back, all facing toward her. Not forward, toward the direction of travel. Toward her. The silhouettes were motionless, just sitting there, watching her drive. Terror spiked through Aisha. She floored the accelerator, her Honda jumping forward. 80 miles per hour, 90. The other car matched her, those forms in the back seat still visible, still watching. Aisha weaved through what little traffic existed, passing a semi-truck, cutting back across lanes. The other car followed every movement, ignoring traffic laws, ignoring safety, ignoring physics that should have prevented such precision, maneuvering. Then Aisha noticed something that made her stomach drop. The other car's wheels weren't touching the ground. She looked carefully, afraid she was imagining it. But no, there was a gap, maybe 3 inches, between the tires and the pavement. The car was floating, hovering, maintaining perfect alignment with her vehicle, while not actually making contact with the road. Aisha screamed inside her car, the sound swallowed by the vehicle's interior. She grabbed her phone, thinking she'd call 911, report this, do something. But before she could dial, the other car began to change. It started moving closer to her, not backward or forward, but laterally, drifting right, crossing from the left lane into the middle lane where Aisha drove. It was going to collide with her. Aisha jerked her wheel right, moving into the right lane to avoid impact. The other car followed, still drifting toward her, now crossing into her new lane. Aisha had nowhere to go. The shoulder was to her right, then guardrail, then a drop-off into darkness. The floating car kept coming, those forms in the back seat growing more visible as the distance closed. Aisha could see now that they weren't sitting normally. Their postures were wrong, twisted, necks bent at angles that couldn't be natural. 5 feet between the vehicles. 4 feet. 3. Aisha made a desperate decision. She slammed on her brakes, her anti-lock system chattering as her speed dropped from 90 to 70 to 50 in seconds. Let the other car pass, get behind it. Anything to break this pursuit. But the other car matched her deceleration perfectly. It stayed parallel, slowing at exactly the same rate, that 3-foot gap maintaining constant. And as they slowed, Aisha saw the driver for the first time. The driver's window had been dark before, but now it was illuminated from within by a cold blue glow. The driver was slumped forward against the steering wheel, head lolling, clearly not controlling the vehicle. The driver was female, wearing what looked like business attire. And the driver was dead. There was no question about it. The skin was gray, the jaw slack, the visible eye glassy and fixed. The car was driving itself, with a corpse behind the wheel and twisted forms in the back seat that were moving now, pressing against the windows, pressing toward Aisha's vehicle. Aisha's speed was down to 40 miles per hour. Behind her, she saw the headlights of an approaching truck, a large semi moving fast. An idea formed in her panicked mind. She accelerated hard, timing it carefully. The other car matched her acceleration. Aisha waited until the truck was close, then jerked her wheel left, cutting in front of the semi. The truck's horn blared, a deafening sound. The trucker hit his brakes. Aisha accelerated away, praying her maneuver worked. She looked in her mirrors, expecting to see the other car follow her. Instead, she saw it interact with the semi-truck for the first time. The floating car passed through the truck, not around it, through it. The vehicles occupied the same space for a brief moment, interpenetrating, and then separated. The truck driver clearly didn't see the other car. His horn stopped. He resumed speed. apparently thinking Aisha was just a reckless driver. But the other car had been affected by the intersection. It was flickering now, like a bad video signal, its form becoming unstable. Aisha pushed her Honda to its limits, racing down the highway. The other car was falling back, its form breaking up, becoming transparent. The last thing Aisha saw in her mirrors, before it disappeared completely, was those forms in the back seat, reaching toward her through the windows, their elongated arms stretching across impossible distances. Then it was gone. Aisha was alone on the highway, just normal vehicles around her, normal traffic, normal reality. She drove in shock for 10 more minutes before pulling off at a rest area, where she sat in her car, shaking violently, crying, trying to process what had happened. She didn't report it. Who would believe her? A hovering car full of ghosts or entities, pacing her vehicle with impossible precision. She'd sound insane. But Aisha did research. She found accident reports for that stretch of I-40 in Arkansas. In 2009, a woman named Cynthia Morrison had lost control of her light blue Honda Accord on that highway during a rainstorm. Her car had gone off the road, rolling multiple times. Morrison and her 3 teenage passengers, her daughter and 2 of her daughter's friends, had all died instantly. The accident had occurred at mile marker 185. Aisha checked her GPS logs. Her encounter with the floating car had started at mile marker 187 and ended at mile marker 175. 10 miles of pursuit beginning near the crash site. Aisha found photos of Cynthia Morrison online, from memorial pages and news articles. The woman she'd seen slumped behind the wheel of the other car matched Morrison's appearance. And the accident report noted that Morrison had been driving her daughter and 2 friends back from a concert in Memphis, heading home to Little Rock, the same route Aisha had been traveling. Aisha doesn't drive that stretch of highway anymore. She takes alternate routes now, even though they add an hour to her travel time. She won't risk encountering that car again, won't risk seeing that blue glow and those twisted forms pressing against windows, reaching for her. She wonders sometimes what would have happened if she hadn't crossed in front of that truck, if the intersection hadn't disrupted the other car's manifestation. Would it have eventually forced her off the road? Would those reaching figures have somehow pulled her into their vehicle, adding her to their eternal drive? Aisha doesn't want to know. She's grateful she escaped, grateful the truck was there at the right moment, grateful that whatever mechanism allows ghosts to attach to their death sites apparently can be disrupted by the living. But late at night, when she's driving alone, Aisha sometimes checks her left side mirror compulsively, looking for a light blue sedan that shouldn't be there. She varies her speed randomly, never maintaining constant velocity for long. She avoids cruise control, because she knows that somewhere on Interstate 40 in Arkansas, near mile marker 185, a car full of the dead still drives, still follows, still reaches. And if you're unlucky enough to be traveling that road at the wrong time, in the wrong lane, at the wrong speed, they might pace you. They might match your movements with impossible precision. And those twisted forms in the back seat might press against their windows, reaching for you, trying to pull you into their endless, repeating journey. Aisha got away, but she knows others might not be so fortunate, because the dead don't rest on highways sometimes. Sometimes they drive, forever approaching home, but never arriving, looking for someone to join them in their suspended moment between departure and destination. The car is still there. It's always there. And it's always looking for someone to drive beside. Story 7. The Bridge That Reversed Time. Leonard Wu transported luxury vehicles across the country for high-end auto dealers driving a specialized car hauler that could carry 6 vehicles at once. On April 3, 2019, he was crossing Louisiana on Interstate 10, heading from Houston to Mobile, when he approached the Atchafalaya Basin Bridge, an 18-mile stretch of elevated highway that crosses swampland and water. Leonard had crossed this bridge dozens of times. It was routine, a long, straight section with water and cypress trees visible on both sides, usually taking about 15 minutes to traverse at highway speeds. He entered the bridge at 2:47 p.m., according to his dashboard clock. Traffic was moderate, a mix of cars and trucks making the crossing. About 5 minutes in, Leonard noticed the sky darkening. He glanced up, expecting to see storm clouds, but the sky was clear. Not twilight. The quality of light was wrong for that. The sun was still high, but its light was dimming as if something were gradually filtering it out. Within 2 minutes, it had gone from bright afternoon to dusky twilight, despite his clock showing only 2:52 p.m. Other drivers were noticing too. Leonard saw brake lights ahead, vehicles slowing, confused by the sudden darkness. He checked his mirrors and saw the bridge behind him was still in full daylight. The darkness was localized to the section he'd entered. A bubble of wrong time, traveling along the bridge with the traffic. Then Leonard felt the temporal displacement. It wasn't dramatic, no violent lurching or disorientation. It was subtle, almost gentle, like the feeling of déjà vu but inverted, like experiencing something for the first time that you've actually done before. Leonard had just thought about checking his speed, but then realized he'd already checked it seconds ago, except the memory was forming in reverse, the decision to check happening after the action. His clock read 2:50 p.m., 2 minutes earlier than moments before. Leonard stared at it, certain he'd misread. But no. As he watched, the digits counted backward. 2:50 became 2:49, became 2:48. Time was running in reverse. Leonard looked at the traffic around him. The vehicles were still moving forward, but everything else was wrong. Rain that had been on his windshield from a brief shower earlier was reappearing, drops forming and sliding upward, climbing the glass and disappearing into the sky. A bird flew backward past his truck. The cypress trees visible in the swamp were swaying in reverse, their movements rewinding. The radio played backward too, songs reversed, words inverted into nonsense syllables, melodies running from end to beginning. Leonard switched it off, his hands shaking. His clock showed 2:45 p.m. now, counting steadily backward. He'd entered the bridge at 2:47. Time was taking him back to before he'd even arrived. Leonard tried to rationalize it. Maybe his clock was malfunctioning. Maybe he was having some kind of medical event, a stroke or seizure affecting his perception. But other drivers were reacting too. He saw a car ahead pull onto the narrow shoulder, the driver getting out to look around, clearly panicking. Leonard kept driving, afraid to stop, afraid that stopping might make him stuck in this rewinding moment forever. His clock reached 2:44 p.m. Leonard had been driving forward on the bridge for what felt like 10 minutes, but according to his clock, he'd gone backward 3 minutes. His GPS was glitching, his position jumping around randomly, unable to determine his location. His phone showed no signal. Then Leonard saw the accident. Ahead of him, maybe a quarter mile, he saw emergency lights, an ambulance, police cars, a fire truck. They were attending to a crash, a car that had apparently struck the bridge railing. Leonard slowed, preparing to navigate through the scene. But as he got closer, the scene ran in reverse. The emergency vehicles drove backward away from the crash. The firefighters who'd been working on extracting someone from the car walked backward, reattaching equipment they'd just removed. The ambulance backed up to the crashed vehicle, and paramedics carried a stretcher backward to it. The person on the stretcher, Leonard couldn't tell if it was a man or woman from this distance, was lifted back into the crashed car. Then the crash itself reversed. The car backed away from the railing, the crumpled hood unpaneling itself, glass fragments flying back into window frames and becoming whole. The car straightened, returning to its lane, accelerating backward down the bridge, completely repaired, as if the accident had never happened. Leonard's mind couldn't fully process what he'd seen. Cause and effect had reversed. The consequence had preceded the cause, time running backward, rewinding the crash and removing it from reality. His clock showed 2:41 p.m. now, 6 minutes before he'd entered the bridge. He was driving through time that hadn't happened yet for him, or had already happened, or Leonard's understanding of chronology was breaking down. Past and future were becoming meaningless concepts. He looked at his side mirror and saw something impossible. Behind his truck, following him on the bridge, was his own truck. Same car hauler, same 6 luxury vehicles loaded on it, same company logo. The duplicate was maybe 100 yards back, and as Leonard watched, a second duplicate appeared behind that one, then a third. He was seeing multiple instances of himself, of his own vehicle, all occupying the same bridge at different points in the reverse-flowing timeline. Leonard in the present, Leonard from 3 minutes ago, Leonard from 5 minutes ago, all existing simultaneously because time had stopped flowing linearly. The sky was getting lighter now. The twilight was reversing into afternoon, but faster than natural. Hours of light change compressing into minutes. Leonard's clock read 2:38 p.m., still counting backward, and he realized with horror what was going to happen when it reached 0, when he went back to before today began, before this week began, before... The bridge ended. Leonard drove off it at what felt like normal speed, time suddenly lurching forward again. His clock jumped from 2:36 p.m. backward to 3:04 p.m. forward, skipping across the temporal discontinuity. The sky was bright afternoon again, matching the time his clock showed. The reversed rain on his windshield evaporated normally now. The radio played forward, a song resuming mid-verse as if nothing had happened. Leonard pulled off at the next exit, his heart hammering. He parked in a gas station lot and just sat there, breathing hard, trying to convince himself he was still sane. He checked his GPS logs. They showed him entering the Atchafalaya Basin Bridge at 2:47 p.m. and exiting at 3:04 p.m. 17 minutes to cross an 18-mile bridge, normal time for the distance and speed. But Leonard had experienced at least 30 minutes of driving, including time that had run backward. He walked into the gas station and asked the clerk what time it was. 3:07 p.m., the clerk said, looking at Leonard strangely. Leonard bought coffee he didn't drink and sat at a picnic table outside, staring at the bridge in the distance, watching normal traffic cross it normally. Later, Leonard researched the bridge. The Atchafalaya Basin Bridge was one of the longest bridges in the United States, built in the 1970s over swampland that was difficult to navigate. But Leonard found something else in his research. Temporal anomalies reported by other drivers, mostly dismissed as hallucinations or tired driver syndrome. Stories of clocks running backward, of seeing duplicate vehicles, of experiencing time loops while crossing. Most reports came from the same section where Leonard had experienced the phenomenon, around the middle of the bridge, miles from either shore, suspended over dark water and ancient swamp. Some physicists theorized that certain geographical locations could experience minor temporal distortions due to quantum effects or local gravitational anomalies. but nothing verified, nothing scientific. Leonard also found accident reports. The crash he'd seen reverse had actually happened 3 days earlier, on March 31st, at approximately 2:43 p.m. A woman named Marie Devereaux had struck the bridge railing and required emergency extraction. She'd survived with serious injuries. Leonard had seen that accident reverse itself at 2:43 p.m. on April 3rd, 3 days later, at the exact same time. He'd witnessed the past replaying, or the timeline correcting, or something his mind couldn't fully categorize. Leonard requested route changes from his company. He now drives northern routes, avoiding Louisiana entirely, avoiding that bridge. He transported his last load across the Atchafalaya Basin Bridge in April 2019, and will never cross it again. Because Leonard knows that time isn't as stable as people think. In certain places, under certain conditions, chronology becomes negotiable. Past and future can coexist, can overlap, can reverse. And on that bridge, spanning dark water and ancient swamp, time sometimes forgets which direction it's supposed to flow. Leonard thinks about those duplicate versions of himself he saw in his mirror, those instances of his truck following him through the reverse-flowing time. He wonders if they all experienced the same thing, or if each version had its own unique experience of the temporal anomaly. He wonders if any of them got stuck there, still driving forward while time runs backward, trapped in a loop that never resolves. He hopes they all made it through. But late at night, Leonard sometimes calculates what would have happened if his clock had kept counting backward, past 2:36, past 2:30, past 2:00, back through morning, back through the previous night, back through days and weeks. How far back does time go in that place? Is there a limit? Or could you theoretically reverse all the way to the bridge's construction in the 1970s, or further back to when the swamp existed without human presence? Leonard doesn't want to know. He's grateful he exited when he did, grateful that the temporal displacement was limited to those 17 minutes that felt like 30, grateful that he returned to normal time before going back too far. But he knows the bridge is still there, still spanning that swamp, still creating conditions where time can reverse. And he knows that other drivers will cross it, unaware of what might happen in that middle section, miles from either shore, where past and future blend together, and clocks count backward, and accidents unhappen before your eyes. The Atchafalaya Basin Bridge is one of the longest in America. Most people cross it without incident. But for some, in certain moments, it becomes the longest bridge in history, because you don't just cross distance on it. Sometimes you cross time, backward into moments already lived, forward into moments not yet experienced, all compressed into those 18 miles of elevated highway above dark water. Leonard crossed it once in that state. He won't risk crossing it again, because next time he might not exit when time starts running forward. Next time, he might keep going backward, watching his clock count down through hours and days and years, driving forward while everything reverses, until he reaches a point so far in the past that the bridge doesn't exist yet, and there's nothing beneath his tires but empty air above ancient swamp. And then what? Leonard doesn't know, and he's determined never to find out. Story 8. The Passengers Who Appeared in My Car. Valerie Chen was driving home to Portland from a weekend camping trip in the Cascade Mountains on August 17th, 2020. She was alone in her Jeep Grand Cherokee, traveling on Highway 26 through heavy forest, late afternoon sun filtering through the trees. The road was winding but familiar. She'd made this trip dozens of times. Around 4:30 p.m., Valerie noticed a figure by the side of the road ahead. A hitchhiker, which wasn't unusual in this area. As Valerie passed, she glanced over. It was a young man, college-aged, wearing a backpack and holding a cardboard sign. Valerie didn't stop. She had a policy against picking up strangers, and continued driving. A few minutes later, Valerie heard a voice from her back seat. "Thank you for stopping." Valerie's heart leapt into her throat. She jerked her head around to look. The young man from the road was sitting in her back seat, backpack at his feet, smiling politely at her. Valerie screamed and swerved, nearly running off the road before regaining control. "How did you get in my car?" Valerie shouted, her voice shaking with fear and adrenaline. The young man looked confused. "You stopped and picked me up. A few miles back. Don't you remember?" "I didn't stop. I drove past you. I didn't pick anyone up." The young man's expression shifted to concern. "Are you okay? You stopped. I got in. We've been driving for 5 minutes. You asked me where I was heading. I said Portland. You said that works because you're going there too." Valerie's mind raced. She had not stopped. She was absolutely certain of that. She'd seen the hitchhiker, considered stopping for maybe a half second, decided against it, and driven past. Yet here he was, in her back seat, insisting they'd had a conversation that never happened. "Get out of my car," Valerie demanded, pulling over to the shoulder. "Okay, if you want me to," the young man said, sounding hurt. "I didn't mean to upset you." He reached for the door handle, pulled it, and the door opened. But instead of stepping out, he froze. "That's weird." "What?" Valerie looked in her rearview mirror. "I'm still in your car," the young man said. "I opened the door and stepped out, but I'm still sitting here. How is that possible?" Valerie turned completely around to look. The young man was sitting in her back seat, the door closed. But as she watched, she saw a translucent duplicate of him moving outside the car, walking away down the road, growing fainter until it disappeared. "Did you see that?" the young man asked, his voice rising in panic. "There were 2 of me. I'm going crazy. What's happening?" Valerie was beyond fear now, into some surreal state where impossibility had become reality. "Who are you?" "I'm Jason Kelly. I'm a student at Oregon State. I'm trying to get back to campus. Who are you?" "Valerie. And I think something very wrong is happening." She pulled back onto the highway, unsure what else to do. "Do you remember anything strange? Before you supposedly got in my car?" Jason thought for a moment. "I was hiking. Got separated from my friends yesterday. Spent the night in the woods. This morning I found the highway and started walking. Then you came along and... Wait." His face went pale. "I don't remember walking up to your car. I remember you stopping, and then suddenly I was inside. But the moment between, it's not there. It's like frames cut out of a video." Valerie's hands were shaking on the steering wheel. "Jason, I don't think you're really here. I think you're..." She was interrupted by another voice, this one female, coming from the passenger seat beside her. "Could you turn up the heat? I'm freezing." Valerie's blood ran cold. She looked to her right. A woman in her 40s sat in the passenger seat, wearing business attire, shivering despite the warm August temperature. Valerie hadn't picked up this woman either. The passenger seat had been empty seconds ago. "Who are you?" Valerie whispered. "I'm Margaret Townsend. We met at the rest area, remember? About 20 miles back. You offered me a ride because my car wouldn't start. That was so kind of you." Margaret smiled, but her teeth were chattering. "I'm sorry to be trouble, but I'm so cold. I can't seem to get warm." "I didn't stop at any rest area," Valerie said. I haven't stopped since I left my campsite this morning. Margaret's smile faded. Of course you did. We talked for 10 minutes. You said you were heading to Portland. I told you about my husband, about visiting my daughter. We've been driving together for... How long have we been driving? You just appeared, Valerie said. You weren't there. And then you were. From the back seat, Jason spoke up. She's right. I've been watching the passenger seat. It was empty, and then this woman was sitting there. She just appeared. Margaret looked between them, confusion and fear growing on her face. That's not possible. I've been here the whole time. We've been talking about... She trailed off, unable to remember. Valerie kept driving, not knowing what else to do. Two passengers who shouldn't exist, who remembered events that had never happened, who had appeared in her car impossibly. She tried to stay calm, tried to think logically, but logic had abandoned her miles back. Then a child's voice came from behind Valerie, from the middle seat in the back row. Are we almost there? I'm bored. Valerie looked in her rearview mirror. A girl, maybe 8 years old, sat in the back, coloring in a book. 3 passengers now. 3 people who had manifested from nowhere, each remembering being picked up, each insisting they'd been there all along. Sweetie, what's your name? Valerie asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Emma, the girl said, not looking up from her coloring. You know my name. You're taking me to my grandma's house, remember? Emma, when did I pick you up? The girl thought about it. After the gas station. You said it was okay to ride in back and do my coloring. You're really nice. Valerie hadn't stopped at a gas station. She forced herself to keep driving, to not panic completely. 3 passengers, all impossible, all convinced they'd been there for miles, all remembering interactions that had never occurred. The highway wound through the forest. Shadows were lengthening as late afternoon shifted toward evening. Valerie passed another hitchhiker on the side of the road, an elderly man with a duffel bag. She held her breath, afraid he'd somehow appear in her car too, but the 4th row of seats remained empty. My phone doesn't work, Margaret said suddenly. I've been trying to call my husband, but there's no signal. Do you have service? Valerie checked her phone. No signal. Not unusual in this area, but unnerving given the circumstances. She was cut off from help, alone with these impossible passengers, driving toward Portland with no idea what was happening or why. Then Jason spoke from the back seat, his voice hollow. I remember now, the accident. Everyone turned to look at him. Jason's face had gone completely white. I wasn't hiking. I was driving. 3 days ago. There was an accident on Highway 26. I swerved to avoid a deer, lost control, went off the road. My car rolled. I remember the impact, remember pain, remember... His voice broke. I remember dying. I died 3 days ago. Silence filled the car. Margaret's shivering intensified. No, she whispered. No, that can't be. I'm alive. I'm right here. When did you need a ride? Valerie asked her gently. When did your car break down? Margaret's face crumpled. Last week. I was driving to see my daughter. It was raining. I pulled into the rest area because I didn't feel well. Chest pains, couldn't breathe. I called for help, but before anyone came... She started crying silently. I had a heart attack in my car at that rest area last week. Valerie looked at Emma in the rearview mirror. The girl had stopped coloring. Emma, when were you going to your grandma's house? Emma's lower lip trembled. I don't want to talk about it. It's okay, sweetie. You can tell me. There was a bad man, Emma said softly. On the highway, 2 years ago. Mom and I were driving, and a bad man in another car made us crash. Mom died. I died too. But I'm supposed to be at Grandma's house. That's where we were going. Valerie's eyes filled with tears. She was driving a car full of ghosts, people who'd died on this highway, who'd never reached their destinations, who were somehow still trying to get there through her. They were hitchhiking between moments, appearing in her vehicle, convinced they'd been picked up, convinced they were still alive and on their way somewhere. "I'm so sorry," Valerie whispered to all of them. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." "Are we dead?" Jason asked. "I think so," Valerie said gently. "I think you've all been trying to finish your journeys, but you didn't make it. You've been stuck here, on this road, waiting for someone to help you reach where you were going." Margaret sobbed harder. Emma started crying too. Jason sat in silence, processing the reality of his death. Valerie kept driving toward Portland, carrying her impossible passengers, and she made a decision. "I'll take you," she said. "Wherever you were going, I'll take you there." "Jason, were you heading to campus? Margaret, where was your daughter? Emma, where was your grandma's house?" They told her. Jason had been heading to Corvallis. Margaret's daughter lived in Beaverton. Emma's grandmother had lived in Gresham. Had lived, past tense, because by now it had been 2 years since Emma died, and her grandmother might not even still be at that address. Valerie drove them. It took all night. She went first to Corvallis, to the Oregon State campus. As they approached the university, Jason began to fade. "Thank you," he said, as his form became transparent. "Thank you for taking me home." He disappeared, the backpack at his feet vanishing with him. Next was Beaverton, to the address Margaret provided. As they pulled up to her daughter's house, dark at 2 a.m., everyone sleeping inside, Margaret stopped shivering. "I see her," Margaret whispered, looking at the house. "I see my daughter. She's all grown up. When did she get so grown up?" Margaret smiled, tears on her face. And then she was gone, fading like mist. Finally, Emma. The address in Gresham led to an apartment building. Valerie parked outside. "Is this it?" she asked. Emma nodded. She looked at Valerie with wide, sad eyes. "Will I see my mommy now?" "I think so, sweetie," Valerie said, crying. "I think your mommy's been waiting for you." Emma smiled, a pure, innocent expression. "Okay, thank you for the ride." She faded away, her coloring book disappearing with her. Valerie sat alone in her Jeep as the sun began to rise, parked in front of a strange apartment building in Gresham, exhausted beyond measure. She'd driven all night, carrying ghosts to their destinations, helping them finally complete the journeys death had interrupted. Later, Valerie researched them. She found Jason Kelly's obituary, died in a car accident on Highway 26 in August 2017. Margaret Townsend had died of cardiac arrest at a rest area on Highway 26 in July 2019. Emma Chen and her mother died in a collision on Highway 26 in June 2018, caused by a drunk driver. They'd all died trying to get home, trying to reach loved ones, trying to complete ordinary journeys that had been cut short. And somehow, on August 17th, 2020, they'd all appeared in Valerie's car, given one last chance to finish their trips. Valerie still drives Highway 26, but she always glances in her mirrors now, checking her back seat, looking for unexpected passengers. She hasn't seen any since that night, but she's ready if she does, because she understands now that some roads collect the lost, the interrupted, the souls still trying to reach destinations they'll never physically arrive at. And sometimes if you're driving that road at the right time. You might find passengers who weren't there before, who insist you picked them up, who just need someone to take them home one last time. Valerie will drive them. It's the least she can do for the dead who are still traveling, still hoping, still trying to complete the journeys that death stole from them. The highway remembers everyone who dies on it. And some of them are still hitchhiking, waiting for a ride that will finally let them rest. Story 9. The Convoy I Couldn't Escape. Robert Mills drove a cross-country moving truck, relocating families and businesses from coast to coast. On September 28, 2021, he was hauling furniture from Denver to Seattle, taking Interstate 90 through Montana during the late evening hours. The highway was quiet, mostly empty, just the occasional vehicle passing in the opposite direction. Around 10 p.m., Robert noticed lights in his mirrors, a convoy of trucks behind him. He counted 7 vehicles, all the same make and model of semi-truck, all maintaining exact spacing between them, all traveling at precisely his speed. Robert was going 65 miles per hour, and the convoy matched him perfectly, the lead truck maintaining about 300 feet back. At first, Robert thought nothing of it. Truckers often travel in informal convoys for companionship and safety. But as minutes passed, he noticed the precision was unusual. He sped up to 70 to test their reaction. The convoy accelerated instantly, maintaining that exact distance. He slowed to 60. They slowed too. The spacing never varied, not even by a few feet. Robert tried his CB radio. "This is westbound 90, to the convoy behind me. You guys hauling together. Over." No response, just static. He tried different channels, same result. The convoy didn't respond, didn't acknowledge his call. They just kept pace, maintaining that perfect formation. The convoy's headlights were too bright, casting hard shadows in Robert's cab despite the distance. He adjusted his mirrors to reduce the glare, but it didn't help. The light seemed to penetrate everything, creating the sensation of being on a stage under spotlights. Robert decided to take an exit, let them pass, then get back on the highway. He signaled and took the next off-ramp, leading to a small Montana town. As he descended the ramp, he watched his mirrors. The entire convoy took the exit too, all 7 trucks following in perfect formation. His unease escalated to real fear. This wasn't normal behavior. He drove through the small town, a few streets, maybe 1,000 residents, heading for the on-ramp back to the interstate. The convoy stayed with him, maintaining formation, their headlights flooding his cab with that intense glare. Robert saw no drivers in the following trucks. The cabs were dark, windows empty, as if the vehicles were automated. He got back on I-90 and accelerated hard, pushing his truck to 80 miles per hour. The convoy matched him effortlessly. Robert tried varying his speed randomly, 75, 68, 72, 63. But the convoy adjusted instantly, always maintaining that exact 300-foot gap. Then Robert noticed something that made his blood run cold. The convoy trucks had no license plates. The spaces where plates should be were blank, empty metal. And as he studied them in his mirrors, he realized the trucks looked wrong. The proportions were slightly off, the details not quite matching any manufacturer he knew. They looked almost right, but not quite, like something mimicking a truck, without fully understanding what a truck should be. Robert's CB radio came to life suddenly, but not with a voice. A tone emitted from the speaker, a deep, rhythmic pulse that seemed to resonate in his chest. The tone had pattern to it, almost like language, but not anything human. Robert switched off the radio, but the tone continued, coming from somewhere else in his cab, sourceless, vibrating through the metal and plastic. The convoy began to close distance. Slowly, gradually, but unmistakably, the 300-foot gap was shrinking. 290 feet. 280. They were approaching, and Robert understood instinctively that reaching him was their goal. He looked for another exit, but saw none for miles. The highway stretched straight and empty ahead, forest on both sides, no towns, no services, no help. His phone had no signal. He was alone with this impossible convoy that wasn't slowing, wasn't stopping, wasn't responding to any attempt at communication. Robert noticed his fuel gauge. Half full, plenty for his planned route. But as he watched, the needle dropped. In 30 seconds, it went from half to a quarter, then to nearly empty. The convoy trucks were somehow draining his fuel, pulling energy from his vehicle remotely. 250 feet back now. 240. They were going to catch him, and then... What? Robert didn't want to find out. He saw a logging road ahead, barely visible, cutting into the forest. Without signaling, Robert jerked his wheel right at the last possible second, his truck careening onto the narrow dirt road. Branches scraped his sides, the road barely wide enough for his vehicle. In his mirrors, he saw the convoy overshoot the turn, continuing on the highway. Robert drove deep into the forest, the logging road deteriorating into barely a path. His truck bounced over ruts and rocks, threatening to bottom out, but he kept going, desperate to put distance between himself and the highway. After 10 minutes of punishing driving, he found a small clearing and stopped, killing his lights and engine. Silence. Forest surrounded him, dark and dense. Robert sat in his cab, breathing hard, listening. Nothing. No engine sounds, no pursuit. He checked his fuel gauge. It had stabilized at 1/4 tank, no longer dropping. He waited there for an hour, then carefully made his way back to the logging road and eventually to the highway. He approached the junction cautiously, expecting to see the convoy waiting. But the highway was empty. No trucks, no unusual lights, just normal darkness and occasional traffic. Robert drove to the next town and stopped at a truck stop, refusing to continue until daylight. He researched while he waited, trying to find any explanation for what he'd experienced. He found scattered reports from other truckers on I-90 in Montana. Stories of mysterious convoys, vehicle that shouldn't exist, trucks with no drivers, lights that drain power. Most reports came from the same general area, a 50-mile stretch between Missoula and Butte. Some truckers reported being followed for hours. Others described convoys that would surround them, boxing them in, before mysteriously disappearing. One driver claimed to have been forced off the road by phantom trucks, surviving a rollover crash, only to find no evidence of other vehicles at the scene. Robert found one other disturbing detail. 3 truckers had disappeared on that stretch of I-90 over the past decade. Their trucks were never found. No wreckage, no evidence, no explanation. Just gone, as if they'd driven off the highway into non-existence. Robert completed his delivery to Seattle, but he immediately filed notice with his company. He would no longer drive that route, would no longer take jobs that required crossing Montana on I-90 at night. The company tried to convince him otherwise, but Robert was adamant. He'd seen what he'd seen, and he wouldn't risk encountering it again. He now drives southern routes exclusively, through states where the highways are more populated, where help is closer, where mysterious convoys don't appear in mirrors like vengeful spirits. He's taken a pay cut for the route restriction, but he doesn't care. Money means nothing compared to survival. Sometimes Robert wakes from nightmares of those headlights in his mirrors, that perfect formation, that impossible precision. He dreams of the convoy catching him, surrounding his truck, those empty cabs pulling alongside, and whatever drives those vehicles, whatever intelligence operates them, finally revealing itself. He's grateful he took that logging road, grateful he escaped. But he knows the convoy is still out there, still traveling that stretch of Montana highway, still looking for lone trucks to pace, to pursue, to drain and capture. Robert won't be one of them. He'll never drive that road at night again, because he knows that some convoys aren't driven by truckers looking for companionship. Some are driven by something else, something that mimics trucks without being trucks, something that hunts the lonely highways of Montana, collecting drivers who can't escape. The convoy is always moving, always hunting, always maintaining perfect formation as it searches for its next target. And if you're ever driving I-90 through Montana late at night, and you notice lights in your mirrors, and those lights maintain impossible precision, matching your every speed change, never falling back, never passing, just staying there with mechanical perfection. Don't stop. Don't slow down. Find any exit, any side road, any escape route, and take it immediately. Because the convoy doesn't stop once it finds you. It follows until it catches you. And what happens then is something no one who's been caught has ever returned to describe. Robert escaped. He's one of the lucky ones. But he knows that luck is finite, that second chances are rare, and that the convoy is patient. It has all the time in the world to hunt, to pursue, to wait for the next mistake, the next wrong turn, the next driver who stays on that highway just a little too long. He'll never be that driver again. He'll take the long way, the slow way, any way that doesn't involve I-90 through Montana after dark. Because some roads are hunted by things that look like trucks, but aren't trucks. And some convoys aren't heading anywhere. They're just searching, endlessly searching, for drivers to add to their endless formation, to join them in their purposeless journey through eternal night. Robert saw them, Robert escaped them, and Robert will spend the rest of his life making sure he never sees them again.